Hi, everybody. This is Nancy Miller from My Creative Life, and today I'm so excited. I have Samantha Cotterill, who is an award-winning children's book illustrator and author, on my podcast today. Hi, Samantha.
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited just to share my story and just hopefully help inspire others that may be tuning in.
Well, those of you who may not be familiar with Samantha's work, she just does these amazing 3D illustrations. I wanted to just give a little preface about how I found out about her work. So I'm doing this search and I started getting into cut paper illustrations. And it is such a small grouping of people who do this type of work, and the ones that are at a huge, I mean, the level of intricacy and detail. So your name popped up at the top when I did a Google search. And so there's only a few people, but I was enamored. I was just like, these are beautiful. I just want to step into this world that she's created. And I went to your website and then did more digging, and it was just fantastic. But I don't want to keep talking. Can you tell the audience a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. My name, like I said, you said, Samantha Cotterill. I'm a picture book author and illustrator, and I work outside of my home in upstate New York. I'm kind of the late bloomer, so to speak, in terms of picture books, as I didn't get my first children's book deal until I was 40. And I'm now probably about, I think, 12 to 13 books in. And yeah, I basically just work full time out of my studio at home and just try to cranking out books.
Wow. I mean, they're beautiful. Anybody who's listening, please go check out her work. I'm going to have links in the description box below this, but your 3D illustrations, I mean, to give the audience kind of the vision, when I saw your work, it really brings me back to my childhood. I remember when I was a little kid, you get those diorama assignments, and I would be that kid who would be like, oh, I can't wait to make a diorama. But yours are so intricate and so like magical and whimsical. And I go like, wow, I just feel like I've entered into this world you've created. What
Oh,
got you from doing, and I love your 2D work. I mean, the little census series that you did 2D illustrations with, they're just the gesture, the just descriptive feeling and emotions that I got from looking at the illustrations. But what made that leap for you? I assume you started with 2D and then jumped into 3D. Like, what inspired you to create these worlds?
yeah. Well, I think ever since I was young, I've always been super into three-dimensional worlds. And it's kind of like what you said with childhood, and it's just flooding back memories of when you're young. And I was really, really into a dollhouse that my dad had built for me. And I played with that dollhouse more so, not the stories of creating imaginary situations, but it was primarily designing and setting up scenes. And I did that with this dollhouse probably well into high school. To like, I've always had a thing for miniature, anything in 3D. And even when drawing with two-dimensional type approach, I always found myself yearning to cut it out and layer it, because everything just always looks better in 3D. For me, that's just my personal natural instinct, is to always want to make things three-dimensional. That being said, two-dimensional is great because it's a nice avenue to just kind of feed into the 3D when you are going into that approach. So I do like working in both because it feeds one another. It kind of helps me just to keep engagement, keep inspired just by switching back and forth. But I just gut-wise, intrinsically always go towards 3D. It's just the way I am.
Because it's interesting to hear that you, because I always feel the same way. I go like, it looks better if it's 3D. And I'm just like, I keep looking at, like, I'll go on Instagram and I'll look at people's work. I'm like, oh, that would be really nice if it was like, it's even nice, it was good work, but I was like, oh, if they just cut it out and put it into a scene. So
Yeah, so I was so excited when my first 3D book with Paula Wiseman Books, my editor Sylvie Frank and Lizzie Bromley, I had pitched to them the idea of, what about if would you be open to me doing this story in a 3D kind of scenario? Because I've always been wanting to do that, and they were just right away like, sure, give it a try, that sounds great, and giving me that green light to just experiment and figure that out was life-changing, because it just kind of helped me set on this path that really was one I wanted to journey down, and I just needed a little bit of boost from within my publishing relationships to kind of give that a go. And I've always been grateful for that, because ever since then, it's just been what I can learn, what I can experiment with, just to keep exploring that avenue. And it's been such a great journey. But the funniest part about it is the journey is within the world of miniature cutout paper, intricate details, yet I have rheumatoid arthritis. So I'm picking a medium that is probably the worst for my hands.
Wow.
So it's been interesting for sure.
Wow. I mean, because I looked at your 2D work, your 3D work. So like, how do you know how you're going to approach a story? Because like Little Senses, those are 2D illustrations, and then you have other stories like the Rhino one that you did 3D. Like, how do you make that decision with that story that you're going to go in one direction or the other?
I think it's just it depends on like the Little Senses series I wrote as well, and those just had such a simplicity to them that the focus really needed to be on the words, with very simple visual cues for input of information, and just really trying to teach the concepts that I was trying to get across through those books, that I felt like the more simple that I could be, the easier it would be for me to communicate the messages that I really wanted to get out to the readers. And whereas other stories that have either come my way or what have you, sometimes it's just reading the manuscript. If my brain just starts to immediately put things to 3D, then I kind of just know that's the path to explore. I think it just kind of intuitively happens when you just start reading something and your brain just starts to visualize it. Sometimes it visualizes it in 2D. Most of the time, 99.99%, it visualizes in a 3D manner. And I guess it's just each project is its own individual thing, and you just kind of have to go with gut-wise where you think it needs to go. That being said, there were a couple books that I thought, oh, this would be great in 3D. And then once I started exploring it further and playing around, I realized, okay, maybe I just need to shelve that because it's really not working the way I thought it was going to work. Let's go and try it in 2D. So I think it's also just having that open mind of just being adaptable and working with doing a back and forth and working with the manuscript and just kind of getting a feel for what is really working and what's not.
Oh, so in the process with the 3D work, I was wondering, how do you get the client to understand? Because I had checked with like just other illustrators who work in 3D or with cut paper, and they said it can be challenging so that the client is comfortable with the process. Like, is there how closely do you work with, like, from your line to your, your final? Is it, that process to communicate to the client?
Yeah, well, I've been really lucky in that I'm just doing my fourth 3D book now, and they're all with the same publisher, with Sylvie Frank and Lizzie Bromley at Paula Wiseman, and they're the ones that gave me that first shot with Jinx and the Doom Fight Crime. And then, oh, sorry, so can we edit that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just realized I made a mistake. Okay, let me start that over. All right. So yeah, I've had a really great experience so far, and I've been really lucky. I've had 3 now 3D books with Paula Wiseman Books, and then my second 3D book, Just Add Glitter, which was written by Angela Diterlizzi, that was with Beach Lane Books. And all of my experiences have been really wonderful in the sense that the communication was really great for working with them in regards to trying to illustrate how my work is going to look in 3D. So most often what I will do is when I've sketched out the dummy with the publisher, I would provide one final art example, and that would give them a good sense to understand the jump from the sketch to final art, to give them a good idea of kind of how my brain is envisioning the work in the end. So that's been a really great way to communicate that alleviate some anxiousness or nerves on their end on how it's going to turn out. Just Add Glitter, it really turned out, it was just a beautiful book to work on. And the books with Sylvie and Lizzie at Paula, it's been a great experience with them in the sense that they've now gotten used to the way I work. So now that we're on our our 4th book together, they know my ins and outs. So it's getting easier and easier with every book because we've kind of figured out our own way of working. My sketches tend to be very rough because I do like to go into finals with still a lot of room to experiment and play. And they really understand that, as did Beach Lane. So that's been really great. My final arts, if I go into my sketches and I refine and refine and refine, and they're so detailed and so quote unquote finished, I find personally when I go into final arts, then I've lost that enthusiasm, and I don't have the same motivation to just really push and pull and play with the image to where it can just elevate it if I allow myself a lot of open room, if that makes sense.
Wow. I just so because of the 3D work, how do you know you're because I was imagining how do you figure out the sizes and the scale that you're going to work at in relationship, because then it's produced on in a 2D flat surface book? How do you figure that out?
Well, first, when I do the sketches,
Yeah.
I know that everybody's different, but for me, after a while of doing it, you kind of just start to intrinsically know and have spatial relation in your head when you're sketching things out. But that being said, my first approach is just to sketch things the way I just even if as if it was 2D, I just start to sketch the scenery. And then there's just an understanding that I know that when I'm translating it to 3D, some things are going to change. Some things are not going to work exactly the way that I've got on paper, but the main point is just to get the main message across of what I'm trying to communicate on that spread. When I'm going into finals, my setups can be quite large. I guess I would say on average, they're about maybe 3 feet by 4 feet. So they're big enough just because of my rheumatoid arthritis. I have had to work with my limitations. And in regards to my hands, I cannot do such detailed, tiny work that would just make it impossible because of my fingers. So I had to find a way to still create these miniature paper worlds, but in a scale that my hands would allow me to do. So they're quite large, but when I use my camera, the big thing for me is I will then, when I set up my camera, the frame the image on the back of the camera, the screen, is basically the size of an 8.5 by 11 picture book opened up. So what I will do is when I've created my final spread, I will get my camera out, have all the lights set up, and then when I'm looking on the screen, then I can start moving things around a little bit, because I do get a better sense of what it's going to look like on paper when I'm looking at my camera, if that makes sense.
So all your finals are you're just sending the digital photographs that you're taking for
Yes.
for sure.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So I feel it's funny because the 2D work is a much shorter process for sure. Like when I've done a 3D book and then I switch to a 2D book, I'll go, oh my gosh, that just went by so fast. Like, wait, that's done already? Like, it's just it's all relative, but just because the steps within 3D, I've got the sketching, I have the cutting out the buildings. I do it with my latest book, Thankful. I've gotten even more into 3D building within the sets, and I still have all my figures are drawn figures, but the elements within the sets are more three-dimensional. And so I've got that set up. I have that stage. Then I have the setting up the whole quote unquote diorama, which is quite large. Then I have the lighting and the photography and then the editing of the photographs. So it's just, there's so many steps involved, but I'm so into it that it doesn't feel like a lot of extra work. I just love the 3D world so much that while it may be more steps than the 2D, sometimes I find I have an easier time with that because I like to switch back and forth, and it kind of works with my brain to kind of go from different aspects of photography, cutting out, drawing. So I really like the whole process.
Wow. It blows me away because people who do this type of your technique, I mean, I did a kind of I tried it, and it was like it's thrilling, and it's kind of like for me, because it's the first time it was a little nerve-wracking because I felt like I feel like I'm on a roller coaster and I don't know which direction and it was, but at the same time it was like people were asking like, how did you get that? I was like, oh well, that's spatial depth. I mean, it's not like I photoshopped that or whatever. And there's something about it when you do like that depth, and then playing with the camera's depth of field and things like that, that I feel like it feels more natural. I don't know if that makes sense, like versus like if I photoshopped it, you can photoshop it, but it just feels a little fakey. I don't know, to me, versus really do it.
No, I agree, and I'm really antsy to get on this latest book because I've just finished taking another photography classes. I'm trying to keep honing my skills as I go further along, and each time I do a book, I'm trying something new, or I'm trying to get some more information on how I can take this to the next level. So it's been a really great journey. And in terms of paper artists in general, it's funny because I myself, I don't have a lot of patience, in the sense that when I see a lot of paper cut work that's all this detailed cutout work, I'm always impressed because I'm more impulsive and more like I would not be able to just sit and cut and cut and cut these intricate that would take forever to do. I have to do things I have to go. So it's trying to find a way that I can create these miniature worlds in a way that suits my impulsive nature.
So how long does it take you to do like one of the, like for the spread in one of your books with the 3D? How long would you say like it took you to do the cutting and then staging it, lighting it, and then doing the editing if you needed in for the digital file? Like how long would you say one illustration would take you?
Oh, I think it just all depends because they're all so different. I mean, it really depends on the spread, and it also depends on how it's flowing. And sometimes there's one that will take, it can take 2 weeks for something to be built. And that's a very long time. For me, not good with things taking a really long time, because then I start to get antsy and lose focus. So for me, a quick one is usually like a spot or a half spread. I can do that in a couple days, 1 or 2 days if I'm lucky. That's like a fast one. But the longest I would say is 2 weeks for one image. And that's like really long for me. I have to kind of try to pace it a little bit more, where I aim for 2 huge spreads a month, which are like the really big double spread details, and then a few extra smaller spots can fit within that same time frame. I'd say generally my sketching goes pretty quickly. I'm pretty quick at the sketching stage of coming up with the dummy, and so that usually takes me about 3 weeks or so. And then I just, plus my sketches are a little bit loose and open for finals. And then when I approach finals, I'd say on average 4 to 6 months would be the average amount of time for final art. And then I would have my editing of just going in and fixing, looking at the photos and just adjusting levels and exposure and color. That would probably be over like a few weeks.
Oh, well, it's beautiful at the end, the results. I'm just like those little rooms, like I go like, oh my goodness, I don't know, it's just beautiful. It just amazes me that you do all of that, and it really, to me, it's like a short period of time because you're building it out. It's almost like, I go like, it's like she's a set designer, like, you know, I imagine what set designers would do for, like, you know, for a Broadway show or something like that,
Yeah.
because it's like
Oh,
you
I
have
know.
the
I always feel like I feel if I could go back a little bit in time, I wish I had like Wallace and Gromit. Like, I'm obsessed with Aardman and just stop motion animation, like that kind of thing. I've always
yes.
been fascinated with, and I just love those kinds of worlds. So I always think that my other side of me would be getting into like set, like exactly what you said, like set design. And just always loved that. I've just loved spaces. It's just something that really, it just really attracts me.
Well, I mean, it just amazes me. And then the size of your work, how do you store that? I mean, yeah, because I just imagine like, oh, you must have like this room just filled with these beautiful 3D illustration. Like, how do you store that?
Well, it's funny. A lot of people will ask me, what do you do with all the sets and the objects? And most of it either gets, to be honest, most of it gets reused, cut apart, taken apart, or thrown away. I really only keep, it's kind of, I think in art school, I never forget, this one professor had told me, for every 5 paintings that you do, 4 will be meh or horrible, and 1 will be good that you actually will like in a few years. And I find that's the case, that most of my work in the moment, like, oh my goodness, I love it, I love it, I love it. And then a few months later, I'm like, oh, I can't believe I made that. I can't believe I made that. I don't want anybody to see that I've done that. But there's always one that I will like and will always like. And that's a great thing, because it's showing that I'm pushing myself. I'm constantly growing. If I loved everything I did from day one, then I'm not doing enough to explore and figure things out. It just would be a sign that I'm not pushing myself enough. So I do like it when I'm only satisfied with a small percentage of my work a few months down the road. And I think if I kept on to everything, it wouldn't allow me mentally to keep going. If I kept everything stored and on display, then I'm not sure that I would give myself that freedom to wipe a slate and keep trying something new. So it's very important for me to not keep most of the work. And then if I throw it away or cut it apart or reuse it, it's not tempting to to reuse and go back, so to
Yeah.
speak. It only allows me to keep going forward. And I know a lot of people always like, how can you do that? But I have to do that. Otherwise, I'm not going to give myself that opportunity to see where this 3D is going to go.
Gotcha. That's a good point. I I just know I can't store it all. I have a very small studio, and my husband keeps saying like, "Why do you keep bringing more stuff into our home?" So I've just been like, I that's probably one of the biggest things that stops me from going full like 3D, because I go
Yeah.
like, I don't know what I would do with it, because I literally can't store it all, and you can't. I mean,
No,
it's not practical.
it's not. And I don't have a very big space at all. So it's the same. And it's funny because it's a big battle within myself when I'm working in 3D. And I've noticed as I've gotten into my late 40s, I've become even more and more into this streamlined living where I like less and less clutter. I've been noticing that I want more open, clean spaces around me. And it's a complete contrast to the way I work in 3D. So I have this fight within me where I'm making this 3D world, but then I'm agitated at the same time because I can't stand the piles. I'm a messy creator. So it's just been this really interesting experience where I have a love and hate relationship because I can't stand mess and clutter. And like, I feel like I can't breathe because my room isn't big enough to really just spread out, yet I can't not make 3D work. So it's kind of fascinating. Fascinating.
Well, all of your efforts has paid off. I go like, if I could go back into time, and if I could purchase one of your books and read it to my son when he was at that age where he liked picture books, he and I would be just enthralled, because there are just so many little things that you go and you just point out. And like, for even adults who read books to their children, it's just something it's such a, you feel like it's such an art form of what you've created. So
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I know. I think it's just, I mean, I grew up in England and there were a lot of books that I had, very British books, so to speak. And I grew up with Paddington Bear and the television show that had come out when I was young. I loved these miniature worlds that were just imaginary worlds that I wish I could live in. And I was always like, oh, I wish I could live there, or I wish I could live in a town like that. So I think that's what I'm recreating now when I'm creating picture books, is just trying to create these worlds that you just would want to go and visit.
well, it just, I definitely, I feel like I could go to those places. They feel so real. I know the characters are like the little drawn and they're cut out, but I just feel like, oh my gosh, I just want to reach in and just grab that little book off the bookcase. I don't want to open it. And yeah, it's just, it's delightful.
Oh, thank you. I'm excited to see I would say the epitome, like the height of
Yeah.
creating these aesthetic interiors will be with this latest one written by Elaine Vickers called Thankful. And I think I shared a couple sneak peeks with you earlier. It hasn't gone public yet. I think at the end of January, that cover will be online, and then people will be able to get a little bit of what's going to be coming in the fall. That one I really love in the sense that I got to explore with interiors and just furniture and lighting. And even though lighting has been present in the previous work, this one I really got to play with just home interiors in a way that I feel super connected to, and I'm really excited for that one to come out.
My next question is about the Little Senses series. So I gravitated towards those illustrations on your portfolio, on your website, because I was like, oh, the expression and the gesture in the character. It was the one with the little boy with the alligator outfit on, and you could kind of see he was going through this ups and downs, and I just was very drawn to that. Can you talk a little bit about, because you also wrote that, um, and it highlights autism and just the kind of different types of autism there are. Can you tell us a little bit about the inspiration behind the books and the illustrations?
Yeah, so the Little Senses series, the fourth one will be coming out this March, called It Was Supposed to Be Sunny, which is about unexpected change and how to cope when the known gets shifted all of a sudden, and uh, how do you handle moments where plans don't go as expected. That's the fourth one in this series
Okay.
that I started. I think it was first published almost 2 years ago, I believe, is when the first one came out. And it's a series geared for kids on the autism spectrum who may have also sensory processing disorder or any sensitivities regarding sensory issues. Myself, I have Asperger's and sensory sensitivities, and I thought, and I have people close to me as well, and I wanted to create a series of books for families and kids that were without labels and without any qualitative adjectives, that would be approachable for any family that's has children that may be facing struggles with sensory issues, or just seeing a world in a different way, that illustrating in a very simple and straightforward approach may help connect with those kids and readers alike. And just, I wanted to create works that didn't feel clinical and that were approachable and entertaining at the same time. And that's where The Little Senses was born.
Well, I definitely plan to check out those books because as a teacher, I used to teach elementary school, and we get a wide variety of students. And I think for students who may come in contact with other students who have autism, if you're not, it's hard at a young age to kind of understand all these different things and different types of people that we meet. And I think books like this is a way to introduce it into a classroom setting and kind of talk about it in a way that with kids, with very young children, so that they can kind of understand, well, this is kind of where maybe the reason, like kind of what they're going through. And it kind of helps
Yeah.
for empathy and understanding. I found my very young students, whenever I read a children's book to them, that they were just, even the most fidgety child would be like, oh, she's going to read us a book and we're going to make some artwork. And they would just perfectly, everything goes so silent, and then they just become very focused. And I found that fascinating because even though today we're in a very smartphone, watch a cartoon, YouTube and all these things, a children's book resonates with the youngest child. They would get so excited. I mean, it was so amazing. And then they could go to different worlds and places that,
Yeah.
would
Yeah.
never.
And well, and I think with this series, I also was aiming towards for kids that may not all children are really open with their diagnoses and may be reluctant to read a book if it has this very big label of, you have like the autistic child, like it may not be as approachable. And I just wanted to make it something that can be a conversation starter in a way that's safe and welcoming and just comforting. The stories themselves also really focus on the importance of the role of the caregiver, of speaking in very short sentences, very limited, just respecting that idea, as well as there's only so much input that a child may be able to take at once, and just trying to really put every aspect that I could think of into these books to create that connective world for readers was really, really important to me. So I was really glad and just honored that Penguin, my editors at Dial Books for Young Readers, really just had the excitement to go with me on this journey and pick it up as a 4-book series. So I was really excited to be able to get that chance to test this out and do this and put this out in the world. And Dolly Parton had picked up The Speech is Loud for her Imagination Library last year, and that book went out to almost 400,000 homes. And that was just a real huge honor for me to just know that it was just that so many kids were going to have access to these books. So it's been really a great journey.
Well, I think that's awesome that you were able to get stories like that out there, because I think it's great when we have a variety of different kinds of books that we can pull from. As far as from, I guess, talking from more of a teacher standpoint, because you don't really know about, it's kind of like you kind of get what you see in your library that you have at the school, but it's great when, I guess, when you can find those other books that might bring different perspectives and different light to classroom. And it just, I would definitely use that series of books if I was teaching in elementary, an art room, and have the kids explore and see like
Yeah.
a different side of other people that are out there. So
And I think that I've learned
yeah.
from this whole experience of creating books is there's always been that importance in seeing that window of kids being able to see themselves represented in books. This is it's so important to have. And I've been really trying to be conscientious of that with every book I'm making. And I did not realize how much attention I was going to get in such a moving way from like The Speech is Loud. While it was mainly a story that's for kids with sensory sensitivities and on the spectrum, I did have a child. There's a scene on the beach where there's a girl just running across the beach with a beach ball, just part of the scenery. And I put a diabetic patch on her arm. So I've got a lot of friends with kids that have diabetes, and I felt like these kids, all kids need to see themselves represented, just typical scenarios, just day-to-day life. And I have gotten so many emails from that image alone, from parents and through their kids, of noticing that little patch. And I cannot tell you how many families told me that this was the first time they'd ever seen a book with a child showing a diabetic patch, and their kids ran to them screaming, saying, I'm in a book, look at me, I'm in a book. And I had gone in that with the intention of always trying to think of ways that I can include as many kids as possible. But I did not foresee how much reaction I was going to get in such a beautiful way from that just little moment, that it really made me even more conscientious with every book forward, of every time now with every book, even more so. It's like, what can I do? What can I do? What little subtleties can I do that just really naturally and organically make books that can reach to as many kids possible? So it's been quite eye-opening and a really educational experience for me as well.
Thank you so much for explaining that. I'm coming down to some of the final questions. This has been amazing. I've learned so much in just a short time talking to you. I was wondering, so how are your clients finding your work? I didn't know if you do as much promotion, or you found certain things that help get your work out there to the type of publishers you want to work with.
Yeah, I have an agent, a wonderful agent, Kirsten Hall of Catbird. And so she's been the one that has really made those connections for me with publishers. And I'm now at that point where I'm on, I think I said I'm on book 13, maybe. So I've kind of gotten to that point now where I've developed a relationship with some publishers, a great relationship with my agent. And that's kind of primarily where the reaching out has occurred. I used to do a lot more promoting or through social media, and since made the decision to leave. I used to be on Instagram and Twitter and just trying to put my work out there. But for me personally, it had become a self-reflective moment where I was starting to question, why was I really posting every day and seeing that it was for me becoming a little bit of a hindrance, where especially for social media, if I was putting work out, I was starting to get too involved in checking it so often and seeing what the response was and seeing how many people liked that picture, that it was not becoming, I wasn't doing it for the right reasons anymore. And it also was prohibiting perhaps the necessary growth that an image needed to go through. So for example, if I put an image up and you'd get the positive reactions of, oh, this looks great, blah, 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 then subconsciously I think, okay, it's done, it looks good. And I'm not pushing myself enough to really sit back and go, wait, is this really where it needs to go? Do I need to play with this some more? And I have since found, when I kind of backed off from that and really gone into my own kind of space, that my work has grown a lot more because I've just given myself the ability to really, really look, listen, and see where the work needed to go. And I'm not saying that that's for everybody, but for me, even though at the time it seemed like a tough decision, because I'm like, well, how am I going to stay relevant if nobody sees me? It was a really important move to make. I still have my website on my books. My website's there. And if you need to see me, you can reach out to me through, and I will send a newsletter out. And I'm learning that that for me is just perfect balance to enable me to keep my focus, to keep creating in a way that fits my main goal, which is creating books to get into the hands of kids. And I need the time to be able to do that. So that's where I am currently.
Well, that's a very good point. I do feel like it's a lot of promoting nowadays. I feel like it just takes up so much time, and then I'm like doing certain things that I go like, oh, I really should be drawing, or I should be, or practicing, improving my craft, or I don't know, doing,
Yeah.
yeah, that's where I get a little bit like, and like what you said about, sometimes is it the right reason that you're putting it out there, and is it really, if it's not improving the work that you're trying to do, or the artist or the illustrator you're trying to be, then then it might keep you
Yeah.
in a place that doesn't allow you to grow.
Sure. And I think it's also just understanding your own, what you can handle yourself. And like for me, while it's great for connecting with other artists, I know that personally, I have to be very careful that I don't look too much at other people's work where I start to feel the imposter syndrome and start to have self-doubt and think I'm not any good, like so and so much better, look at them. And there's a line where looking for inspiration can cross over into causing you to maybe lose the confidence, and that shouldn't really be happening. So for me, I know that I'm too susceptible to that, and that's something that I have to be very careful of. So for me, Instagram was kind of a great avenue for sharing work and seeing other work, but it also, I think, gave me too many opportunities to stop and question myself, or just take up too much time. No offense, like it just was, for me personally, what worked best.
That's great. So how do you balance your work and your actual personal life? Because, you do these beautiful illustrations, very time intensive. Like, do you have certain working hours? Because I'm struggling with the whole work-life balance thing. I find I tend to be, with the pandemic, kind of a workaholic because I'm so at home now.
Yeah.
The dream was to be able to work on my artwork and go to graduate school. And now I'm like, oh, my family is kind of knocking on the studio. Or are you ever coming out? Like, I don't know. How, do you have any advice?
Yeah. No, well, I will say, it's tough because especially when the kids are younger, it was definitely more of a situation where I would try to, pre-pandemic, of course, while I would try to work while they were at school, and then knowing that once they came home from school, there was really no ability to focus. And then usually by the time they got to bed, there would always be these ideas of when they go to bed, I'm going to work. And then I would always crash and be too tired. So I knew realistically I would just do what I could when I could, and know that at some point that time will come where I will be able to have more freedom to focus, and that time's going to come before you know it. And then you're going to miss those times where you didn't have as much time because your kids were younger. And I'm now at that situation where my kids are a senior. I have a senior in high school and a sophomore in high school. Sure, it's still a little hard to focus in the sense that they're home all day right now due to virtual learning, but they're high schoolers and they're in their room pretty much all day doing their schooling. And then when they're not schooling, they're just kind of doing their own thing, even though we are all at home. And my husband's a professor and he's doing most of his work at home as well. I am used to having the house to myself. It seems to be when I work best. So it's been a transition of trying to get into that headspace, because even with teenagers at home, as I'm sure you know, you'll get interrupted if quite a bit sometimes when they need something or you have to check on them. That still occurs. And I know after pandemic, that'll be a lot different, but I'm in a different boat because my teenagers are pretty independent. So I'm noticing that freedom is actually of being able to just work when it hits or when I feel really productive. I have a much easier time now being able to do that because of the age they're at now.
That's great. I mean, but I sympathize with the virtual learning at home. It's the knock at the internet is too slow. I can't get anything. What's going on? Why can't this work? And that's
yeah. I mean, it's definitely. I think it's very hard to. It's very hard to get in the zone. I've noticed that if I need a good 2 hours of non-interrupted time to get into the zone, and that it's just probably not going to really happen until, well, I know my older one will be going to college soon, but once this pandemic is over and they're kind of in their spaces at school, then I'll be able to, because while they're very independent at home, it's like what you said, there's been days where it's just the internet keeps crashing, or there's something not printing on the paper, on the printer, can you help me? Or blah, blah, like there's just something throughout, or you're even just thinking about them knowing like, oh, okay, they're in class right now. I know they have a test right now, or I don't know how much you just, as a mom, I'm just always thinking about where they are, what they need kind of thing. So I don't know if that part ever turns off in your brain until they actually leave the house.
Well, to the last question. It's basically, if you could go back in a time machine and tell yourself some advice about this art journey that you've been on, that would help you out, what would that be?
Oh, let's see. I guess some of my advice would just be that it's it's okay if your work is just horrible at first. Like your work is not going to be good at first. When you start creating for the first time, yeah, your pieces are not going to be great. And that's okay, because you need to go through the journey and you need to experience, you need to fail at things, you need to try stuff, you need to throw things out, but you just keep at it. And if you feel that passion and excitement and you're kind of know where you want to be, the main thing is that with every drawing you do, every sketch you throw out, you're closing that gap from where you started to where you really kind of know where you want to be in your brain. And you'll get there, but you have to close that gap to getting to that destination. And I'm hoping that final destination is somewhere that's just off the needle, that I'll keep trying to work towards that through the rest of my working days. But every day that I work is closing that gap, and you will get better. And it's something to be excited about. And it's quite fun years from now when you look back at your work and you see just how much you've grown, and just to kind of enjoy the journey, even though you'll probably have a lot of moments of like wanting to give up. But don't give up and just keep at it.
It's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for all of your advice, and thank you for taking the time to speak with me about your work. And I hope everybody will please check out Samantha's website. Can you say your website? I just want to make sure I get it
Yeah,
correct.
it's basically just my name.com. So
Okay,
samanthacotterill.com.
great. Well, everybody, thank you for listening to My Creative Life.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.